An ancient war between humanity and the beings that invaded Earth, the dragons. Extraordinary powers awakened, but still, the world. Child's sagacity confirmed it, but added that Lean would not be an ordinary psychic. He told him that with his ability, he could even become him. Strength that he demonstrated when facing Sergeant Red are not common. This boy has certainly already experienced extreme situations. Then he told them to take the weapons. Well, from that day forward, he resolved to do everything he could to help Lean grow stronger, which thrilled the boy and motivated him to push himself to the limit. After 2 weeks of training, Lean was sparring with Jose, who taunted him to give up while grinning and pressing forward with a punch. But Lean, after dodging the blow, retaliated powerfully with his spear, knocking Jose to the ground and disarming him. It was the protagonist's second year as a freshman, and after his victory over the class president, Jose, he had finally won a weapons duel against all the students in the class. They shook hands because Jose had learned a valuable lesson. He mentioned that, as Lean already knew, he would be promoted to the upper classes next week, and the position of class president would be vacant, so I thought Ian should be the next president, since all the other students had chosen him. Leaning on this idea, they argued and thought that if he became class president, he would be one step closer to getting promoted. At that time, Sergeant Red appeared, furious, saying that this couldn't happen. Before returning to that scene, they showed the muscleman talking about Sergeant Red, saying that his temper was no joke and that he was not someone to be trifled with. At that moment, someone came running and shouted that the worst was happening. Sergeant Red was savior of humanity, and furthermore, living in Ark would mean he would never go hungry or sleep on the streets again. However, he was frowning, which showed, fighting a first-year student. Everyone was there. Ian, with his spear, was ready. Red lit his tobacco as the people at the academy screamed in terror. "Good luck, recruit. Beat him to a pulp." The sergeant surveyed the crowd, and meanwhile, Lean, with bloodshot eyes, questioned if he was the only one who wanted to become the leader, and if they truly intended to leave the class in the hands of a boy who couldn't even properly utilize psychokinesis. They showed everyone lined up previously, and Lean, sighing, wondered why those guys trusted him so much. Because of that, Red broke a broom and threw the stick towards Lean, proclaiming that no one was a match for him and his martial arts, and that he needed to demonstrate his skills in a one-on-one fight. The sergeant then smiled, stating that he wasn't worried about the spear of a mere novice. He threw his shirt to the ground and affirmed that the fight would begin without a hitch. Then he smiled and said that he was not worried about the spear of a mere rookie. A mere rookie threw his shirt to the ground and stated that the fight would begin without problems. He didn't need any weapon to face a child like him. He explained that the rules were simple. If Lean managed to injure any part of his body, it would be considered a victory for Lean. Lean asked what would happen if he lost, and the sergeant replied that he would only have to admit defeat. Red was confident, saying that he had no chances of losing a battle like that. He twirled his spear while the upper-level students wondered if he was really going to fight against the instructor. Simon came to the window to observe and commented that the boy had completely lost his mind. While Lean advanced with his, showing his maturity, he wondered if he would be the only one with food and a better life, or if his younger siblings would be included as well. If not, he would refuse to go to Ark. Lance. Red dodged it with only his fists and threw him away. In his mind, Lean tried to attack from above, but the sergeant managed to defend himself and grabbed him, grabbing his shirt and kneeing him in the stomach. When the sergeant tried to crush him, Lean managed to jump to the side to avoid the attack. He got up, realizing that the sergeant had actually tried to stab him. Red commented that dragons and their subordinates send anyone to their death without wasting any time, so he wasn't going to hold back just because Lean was weak. Lean was surprised, and the sergeant asked him if he only fought with words, challenging him to a real fight. The sergeant lunged at him, grabbing him by the shirt and throwing him to the other side of the room. Lean fell to the ground and got up with a headache, but the sergeant noticed that he was bleeding and paused to consider this. The children shouted, "Come on, Lean, break that sergeant's nose." As Lean charged fiercely with his spear, Sergeant Gento thought he needed to observe Lean's movements more closely. The moment Red glanced at him, Lean was already behind him, attempting to evade the spear. However, the sergeant counterattacked from above. He realized Lean's strategy. Lean was utilizing centrifugal force and acceleration in his attacks. Then he understood why that big guy held a certain esteem for a boy like him. Lean spun on his feet and attacked from above. When he descended, there was a huge impact, but the sergeant met the blow head-on until Lean's spear shattered. Red seized the broken spear, grabbed Lean by the neck, and he stated that if they wanted to take him, they had to assume responsibilities for his siblings, offering them food, clothing, housing, and education. The old man then lifted him up, asking if he should end it all, right there. The furious sergeant unleashed a scorching fire that burned Lean's throat. The other children thought that was an exaggeration, but the sergeant was serious, insisting that if Lean didn't surrender, he would die in this fight. Despite crying, Lean shouted that he wouldn't give up, not even if it meant dying. The big guy called Sergeant Red and told him that he was going too far with this. As he ran towards him, Red threw Lean to the side because he didn't give up until the very end and ended up fainting, asking if Lean wasn't fed up with Ark's methods by now. He heard all the commotion, which angered Sergeant Red even further. He yelled for everyone to be quiet and admitted that, having failed to make Lean surrender, Lean had won the battle. By overcoming that difficulty, Lean had only demonstrated his abilities. After Lean finished receiving treatment, the sergeant proposed promoting. Lean is assigned to Class B. Elsewhere in the facility, a woman expressed surprise at the comments made about Class B, and the sergeant confirmed that they were, in fact, true. He would put Alian on the promotion list. According to him, Alian wouldn't face any difficulties, as his psychic potential was the only thing holding him back. The woman remarked that superiors prioritized psychic potential, but Red believed those blockheads were completely wrong. According to him, what was needed to hunt dragons wasn't magic or psychic abilities, but a strong mind capable of striking vital points, even in extremely frightening situations. Realized that Lean was not an ordinary child and accepted his conditions. However, he made it clear that this would only be possible if he remained in Ark and became. In that respect, Alian had the potential to be the best attacker. Red felt it would be a shame to abandon such a talented gem, simply because her psychic growth was slow. The woman was surprised because she had never heard Sergeant Red praise anyone before. She asked him if he didn't hate Lean because of that first test, but Red responded that he actually liked him. She provoked him by saying, "So, you're a sadist, right, Sergeant?" 7 days passed. The same woman was asking if the big guy, was going to enter Lean's room or not. Guy was standing there in front of the door, holding a basket of fruit. He said he had brought some snacks for Lean, while the woman pressured him to come inside. Boo. Observing through the little window in the door, he commented that it seemed best not to interrupt Lean, who was concentrating on trying to move a small sphere of psychic energy. Lean focused all of his mental forces, and finally the sphere made a leap. Bai and the woman celebrated from outside with a high five. Bai commented that the boy had excellent concentration. At that moment, he opened the door, and a sweaty Lean celebrated. "Phew, I did it." Bai asked him how he was doing and announced that he had brought some snacks. He also informed him that starting the next day, he would be joining Class B. Bai said he was proud of him, since Lean had been training in psychokinesis all the time, even while he was in the medical wing. Lean explained that because his psychokinesis was below average, he decided to train before a great psychic. Thus, the agreement was sealed. Later, Lean arrived at the Ark base, remembering the old man's words and thinking that even though he had no returning to combat, Bai, while peeling an apple, praised his decision, pointing out that even though he was very good at martial arts, he still needed a certain amount of, quote, psychic energy, because the Seeker's battles mainly unfolded in the air. You need to be able to retrieve your weapon if you lose it. In combat, Wei commented. Then, Wei had an idea. He asked the receptionist for permission, assuring her that he would only be in the training stadium for an hour. Training? Lean inquired as to why they were there. Wei explained that, considering Lean's rate of psychic growth, it was extremely improbable that he would develop special traits like fire manipulation or teleportation. Therefore, he shouldn't dream of acquiring any of those abilities. The answer to how he should fight was simple. He would have to train his psychokinesis to its absolute limit, making it his defining special trait. Wei explained that psychic abilities, they were like muscles. The more they're used and trained, the stronger they become. He emphasized that Lean shouldn't give up and should continue training diligently, assuring him that he would succeed. Later, Lean stood before Class B. He took a deep breath before entering, but ended up bumping his head against a bald student. The man looked down, asking what that was, while Lean, still on the floor, touched his sore nose. The bald man laughed, saying that everyone in the class already knew him. He introduced himself as Dmitri Van Porkisi, leader of Class B, but asked to be called simply Dmitri. He hoped they could get along. Dmitri announced. With high-level psychic abilities, he had to do whatever it took to survive, since his brothers depended on him. Shortly after arriving, he heard that it was a free period for martial arts combat, and invited him to follow him to the gym. Lean thought that martial arts times was times the training, what he enjoyed most, as the bow drills were suffocating. Besides the stress and anxiety he felt, there he could suddenly release all that weight from his chest. Lean ran with a piece of a spear in his hand, while Dmitri, confused, didn't understand anything. He watched as Lean landed 1, 2, 3 blows on the heads of some students on the other side, who were provoking their friend Kuro. One of them even wet himself out of fear. Lean shouted that it wasn't fun to harass someone for their weaknesses. He emphasized that everyone should be grateful that there were no fights during psychic training, because they would be the ones who would be in trouble. Dmitri watched everything with a serious look, thinking that this made him want to face Lean even more. Kuro remembered that he was always annoyed for being the weakest in the class. Lean appeared again at that moment to help him, defeating the other students like a savior. Dmitri commented that this was Class B's way of dealing with their training, but he also stated that, in a real battle, the dragons, they would do everything possible to defeat them. He said that what Lean was doing would lead him directly to failure, although he admitted that seeing 3 people against 1 was outrageous, so he challenged Lean to show everyone what real training was like. During the match, Dmitri attacked, and Lean blocked with screams coming from the center of a group of children. One boy was being beaten by another. The attacker mocked the curly-haired boy, calling him weak, and his spear. As Dmitri aimed his sword once again to launch another strike, Lean realized that if he blocked one more time, his spear might break. He then tried to dodge and counterattack simultaneously to unbalance his opponent's sword. He managed to land the blow, but Dmitri jumped back and headbutted him. Lean was thrown to the ground, and as he got up, he shouted, "Seriously? You headbutted me during training?" Dmitri looked at him with a sinister expression and said that the sword wasn't the only thing Lean should worry about, since he had been learning Sambo since birth. Lean, still on the ground, reacted sarcastically, asking if he intended to kill dragons with that Sambo. Dmitri confidently replied that he would strangle a dragon if things got any wilder. The students who had previously provoked Lean began to cheer for Dmitri, calling him the little tiger of Siberia. Irritated Dmitri, he demanded they stop using that ridiculous nickname. His classmates laughed, explaining that at 12 years old, it was obvious he was still just a little pup. Lean observed the scene and noticed that, even though the words might have sounded offensive, there was no malice behind them. They were having fun like a true team, with Dmitri at the center of it all. The only one excluded was Kuro. At that moment, Lean gripped his spear firmly, while Dmitri warned him that in a battle, you should never look away from your opponent. Dmitri attacked with incredible speed, circling behind Lean. He jumped, preparing to deliver what would be the final blow. In the air, Dmitri crossed his, saying that, because of people like him, the recruits were being underestimated. The crowd tried to argue, asking what the attacker had done to be sword with Lean's spear, resulting in a direct impact. Everyone was shocked to see that both of their weapons shattered without losing. The moment Dmitri engaged in close combat, he seized Lean, slammed him headfirst into the ground, struck him in the ribs, and immobilized him with a chokehold. Strangulation, warning him to give up if he didn't want his arm ruined. The entire room erupted, chanting Dmitri's name, even though Lean, with great effort, challenged him, daring him to make him surrender if he had the guts. Suddenly, a cracking sound startled the spectators. Dmitri had broken Lean's arm. Annoyed, he stated that he had warned him to surrender, and admitted that he felt like garbage for having done it. However, he admired Lean's fortitude, as he didn't shed a tear from the pain. Dmitri requested that someone take him to the infirmary. On the way, Lean, injured as he was, punched Dmitri in. He shook his head and complained that everyone he had fought until then was just a bunch of cowards crying over a simple broken arm. He ordered Dmitri to get up, saying that the fight wasn't over. However, Dmitri had already fallen unconscious from the blow. Later, Dmitri woke up, startled, in the infirmary. Beside him, Lean, with his arm bandaged, was fiddling with his bracelet. There was a video message from the major, who said it was impressive, and that he had exceeded expectations. The major also commented that, thanks to him, his brothers were progressing very well. Lean cried as he looked at, so great. He would turn to everyone, calling them idiots, and demonstrate his power by moving stones with his telekinesis. The other children, the photo of his brothers, and excitedly said that next time, he should send a video instead of a message. He thought that, for the first time, his brothers, they seemed fine, but when he turned around, he saw Dmitri awake and wearing a serious expression. He asked Dmitri to hand him the photo, and Dmitri, confused, asked why he wanted it. He had to do it. And Lean responded that since he had broken her arm, it was now his turn to deal with the situation. Dmitri retorted that his head had been split open because of Lean. Lean responded that letting his guard down wasn't how things worked. They both started arguing, but in the end, Dmitri admitted that he didn't hold a grudge. He expressed that he would like to fight him again. Lean replied that perhaps he had acted poorly toward Kuro that day and that he shouldn't have fought, but rather simply offered a helping hand. Dmitri said he understood the feeling, but warned that Kuro could end up being dragged into the situation. Level 2. Lean questioned why, and Dmitri escorted him to the infirmary to reveal the reality they would face. Wounded soldiers were being treated there. Rushed to the emergency room, Dmitri explained that this was the reality they would all face in the upcoming training exercise. Lean, perplexed, commented that the superiors were older, so perhaps it would take them a while to experience that. Dmitri put his hands behind his head and explained that upon reaching, at level 2, they would begin using soldier drugs, which would physically transform them into adults. He added that this was occurring because they would need to confront was on the verge of collapse. However, that wasn't the end. Project Ark was finally activated, a military academy created to train the future. Were frightened as he laughed, saying that he was different from the rest. He claimed that if he left the injured child alone, he would be sent back home, but he preferred to make absolutely sure. Dragons in a war that would take place in 3 years, and there was no time to grow naturally. Lean adopted a serious expression and said that was unacceptable. It was so awful, as he had always yearned to be an adult. He explained that in the past, he did everything he could to survive. He stole food from the elderly and fought against adults, and even though they beat him, he always stood up for his brothers. He concluded by saying that for him, the only thing that mattered was survival. Dmitri was impressed by Lean's determination and commented that it was greater than that of many archers. Shortly after, Sergeant Red announced that they would begin the air training that day and that they would depart at 4:30 p.m. Dmitri, smiling, looked at Lean, who was also excited about the upcoming challenge. Lean thought that the enormous backpack was probably full of rations as well, so maybe it wasn't just simple training. Dmitri observed that some donkeys were already eating food out of the backpacks, and he commented that they were probably going to get into trouble for the rest of the mission. He nudged Lean to look and began to talk enthusiastically about Simon, the latest genius from England. Dmitri confessed that he was really looking forward to punching that guy. For his part, Lean glanced to the side and noticed someone staring at him strangely. Trying to ignore it, he looked away, noticing that Kuro was still sad about everything that was happening. The sergeant interrupted their thoughts, yelling at them to get their butts off the ground and get moving, that he wouldn't survive a day there. Just as he was about to throw the stones, Lean intervened, stopping the projectiles with one hand, and remarked that, run because training was about to start. Then they hurried onto the helicopter, as the mission was about to begin. Meanwhile, Kuro, he was lost in thought, recalling all the times Lean had rescued him, but this time, he felt certain Lean wouldn't appear. His parachute had gotten caught in a tree, leaving him stranded. A flashback showed what had occurred an hour prior. Helicopters were flying over an island, the boat. Children were asking where they were headed, but their bracelets indicated that they were now above a deserted island. The mission was to begin a survival training exercise. The sergeant explained that inside the backpacks, there were enough rations for 2 days, and that it was important to use them carefully, since the instructors would be back in a week. Everyone was shocked to hear this information, realizing that they would have to survive using only the resources limited after the first 2 days. However, Dmitri seemed excited by the challenge. After everyone jumped, the sergeant, rescuing another who had fallen into the mud on the map to ensure that the groups were well distributed, even though they had initially scattered evenly. Some of the girls and boys had already gathered into a group of 7. The sergeant commented that this was how the world worked. People gathered around a strong leader and used that strength to control others, rather than starve together. In that group, the dynamic was clear. They stole. The stones were too slow, and the boy should have used his hand to throw them. The surprised aggressor asked him who he was. Lean, in a provocative tone, the food from each other to feed themselves. The leader, sitting atop a rock, called the others idiots, and forced those who hadn't gathered to share. There was no indication that anyone would oppose them if they continued stealing food. One of the subordinates, sweating nervously, mentioned that Dmitri, Lean, and Del Simon were threats, but they were confident they could overcome them. Meanwhile, Lean finally made it to the island, having fallen into the sea and having to swim to the shore, losing a significant amount of time. Observing the area, he realized he desperately needed shelter. As he moved forward through the undergrowth, he considered that 2 days' worth of rations would be insufficient for children who had never known hunger. Soon, desperation would drive them to steal from each other, which was already occurring elsewhere. Del Simon complained about Dmitri, questioning why he continued to insist on tagging along. Dmitri, being provocative, called him the genius of England and suggested they fight. Simon, irritated, said he didn't want to waste his time on a duel. Dmitri, he retorted that they could start as friends, but deep down he found Simon irritating. At dusk, among the group of thieves, they heard a scream, coming from another part of the forest. Laughing, they imagined it could be more free food. The scene then changed to Kuro, still trapped in the tree with the parachute, while others mocked his predicament. They stole his food, thanked him sarcastically, and left, saying he was, provocatively, replied, "I'm your etiquette teacher." The crowd cheered on the fight, but before it could escalate, a man entered the scene, yelling at everyone. Lucky to be trapped, otherwise, in addition to being robbed, he would have been beaten up. Kuro cried, stuck in the tree until nightfall, remembering Simon and other classmates teased him. At the height of his despair, he began screaming through the forest. Just as he was about to faint, he saw something coming towards him. His expression of happiness didn't last long, as he fainted before he could understand what was happening. Lean appeared, taking in the situation and muttering. In disbelief, he tried to understand what had happened to Kuro. Lean, who was experienced in survival, quickly set up camp. His skill was impressive, demonstrating that before entering the Ark, he had suffered greatly to learn how to assemble something so efficiently. When Kuro woke up, he was looking for Lean, who was sharpening a spear. Lean told him to go eat breakfast and explained that he hadn't been able to retrieve his backpack, so he would have to make do with what he had available. Kuro looked at the meager amount of food and thought it wasn't even enough for one person, but feeling like a burden, he ate anyway, crying, consumed by shame and hunger, while considering himself a pathetic loser. After eating, Kuro thanked Lean, who responded that the next task would be to search for water in that area. Meanwhile, Sergeant Red observed everything through the cameras, surveilling the island, transmitting, in real time, what was happening at that moment. Kareka approached the sergeant and asked, "Aren't you going to quit smoking, boy?" The sergeant, irritated, responded. Presence was intimidating, and the children were paralyzed. He ordered the 2 fighters to accompany him and asked them for their names. The boy introduced himself, asking him to shut his mouth. Kareka asked if something had caught the sergeant's attention, and he showed the images of a boy, Kino, from Norway who, it seemed almost comical that he didn't complain about spending a week on that deserted island, so he decided to improvise and build a raft. He was trying to get back to the Ark. Meanwhile, Kuro and Lien finally located some water. After satisfying their thirst, they started walking, looking for a place to take shelter. Lien, he remarked that they needed to find more food, and wondered if there was anything useful on the island to help them survive the whole week, since there weren't any palm trees or fruits in sight. Suddenly, Kuro stopped and told Lien to halt as well. Taking another step, he realized there was a trap directly in front of them. Lien was surprised and asked Kuro how he had known about it. He explained that it felt like his head was bubbling whenever he sensed danger. Lien mused that this must be Kuro's unique ability, a kind of spider sense activated by his psychokinesis. It was a rare skill indeed. Able to predict short-term events by following the trail, Lien considered that this survival training could be an excellent opportunity, so that Kuro could prove his worth to the sergeants. When they arrived at the shelter, the blonde boy from the rival group opened the door, expecting them to be there, but he realized that the backpacks were missing. The boy with the bandana asked if they should destroy the place, but the blonde refused. He deduced that Kuro and as Del Simon, while the other boy identified himself as Instructor Yon. Red analyzed the situation and began by reprimanding Del Simon for his fur. Lien had probably gone out to find water and suggested that they could ambush them when they returned. Upon arriving back at the shelter, Kuro was exhausted and commented that they had finally arrived. However, Lien asked him to wait, realizing that something was amiss. The stone he had been using as a marker was not on the ground, and there were strange footprints in the area. Furthermore, it appeared that the rival group had passed through and, deciding not to take any risks, had planned to rob them. Lien gathered everything up and suggested they leave before nightfall. They walked until sunset, searching for a safe place to spend the night. Lien asked if Kuro could see anything ahead. At that moment, Kuro's unique ability activated, and he sensed a large beast approaching. Before he could warn Lien, he pushed him aside, and the creature leaped between them. It was a black panther, already growling fiercely. The problem was that the weapon, Lean, had fallen far behind, and the beast was advancing with its enormous jaw. Suddenly, a fire attack struck the panther, startling it. Group D then appeared, asking if they were all right. Jose had been promoted to Group C but was clearly injured. Lean asked if he could walk, but Jose collapsed, exhausted, explaining that he had fallen into a trap set by the rival group. Jose recounted that, upon being captured, he ate all of his food at once to ensure he left nothing for the thieves. He laughed, saying, "If they're going to rob me, at least they'll be leaving empty-handed." Despite being weakened, Jose was happy to basic telekinesis and punched him in the stomach, telling him that he shouldn't be proud of such a mediocre skill. Then he headed, find Lean there. Lean, meanwhile, deduced that the rival group was looting the entire island. At the same time, the leader of the rival group recalled his. In the past, he remembered his father's insistence that he join the Ark after discovering his psychic abilities, something his father considered a golden opportunity, claiming that psychics would become the pride of the nation after the war. Despite his resistance, Dmitri accepted his destiny and entered the Ark Academy. The next day, Dmitri was already training hard, as usual. Simon questioned his energy levels, asking, "Are you sure that you can afford to expend all that energy? We don't have that much food." Dmitri replied confidently that his physique always needed to be in top condition. He believed that to be among the elite, he needed to be physically strong, while Simon countered that seekers should rely on their mental abilities, not. In that moment, focusing on building his muscles, Simon mentioned Lean, and Dmitri became thoughtful, admitting that he missed him. Seizing the opportunity, Simon activated his. Using his psychic abilities, Simon asked, "Have you fought him before?" Dmitri smiled, accepting the challenge, while Simon took the bait, ready for the confrontation. The next scene showed Lean's shop, which was located inside a small cave. Lean greeted the group and informed them that everyone would stay together until the end of their training. Lean and Kuro would go out to gather firewood and find food, while Jose, who was wounded, would stay behind watching to Ian, praising his decision to help the weak, but warning him with another blow. If he didn't have skills comparable to Simon's, he was even. Area. Jose commented that, even though he was limited, he could still help thanks to his combustion ability, which gave them a great advantage, since having fire meant that they could fish and prepare something like fried fish. Kuro, however, questioned whether Jose really knew what he was talking about, since they didn't have any fishing equipment. Meanwhile, Lean thanked Kuro, remembering that he would have lost his life if it weren't for him. Previously, Lean, crestfallen, admitted that he always believed he could help, but realized that he didn't always find solutions. Now, however, he was convinced that Kuro was a psychic genius, with incredible abilities both to defend himself and to save others. He declared that they would go together until the end, side by side, because they were friends. Kuro then recalled his childhood in an orphanage in Japan, where he didn't have a name until they called him Kuro because of his dark skin. There, he was constantly harassed. Because he was sensitive and a crybaby, he eventually awakened his psychic abilities one day. Lean suggested that he use his skills to catch the minnows, but in reality, he thought that Kuro could predict the movements of the fish with his short-term precognitive ability, so Lean would catch the fish at the precise moment. And, in the end, it was Kuro's telekinesis that worked. He simply lifted the fish out of the water with his abilities, securing food for the group on the 43rd day of training. Lean and Kuro returned with bags full of fish. Lean praised his partner, telling him that he was amazing. As they approached, worse than garbage, Ion explained that in 3 weeks, they would have to manifest psychic abilities or be expelled from the academy. He introduces himself. The cave. Lean asked Kuro to crouch down and wait while he went to check the situation inside. Upon entering, he found Jose on the ground, completely devastated, in the famous Rania stance. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the fight between Dmitri and Simon, where Dmitri hands Simon a sword and complains that they brought weapons for training that was supposed to be unarmed. Despite this, he was excited to fight Simon, who commented that Dmitri was the representative of Class B and was being promoted to Class A. For Simon, this was a test of his capabilities, which only made him, Dmitri, even more excited, as he loved a good fight. The battle commenced, with Dmitri launching a full-force attack, but Simon dodged and precisely countered. After a series of attacks, Dmitri appeared to be in trouble, but he managed to turn the situation around by disarming Simon with a single blow. It looked like Dmitri was about to win. Simon activated his psychic abilities, stopping Dmitri in mid-air. Simon stated that, if it had been a real fight, he would have been the victor, since Seekers should use their skills in combat and not just rely on brute force. Back in the cave, Lean was helping Jose up, who was busy complaining. No, I'm too tired to even scream. Jose explained that he had been attacked by the same group that had robbed him previously. The faction was comprised of 7 members and had taken all of their food. Jose warned that they would likely return, but Lean, with a serious look on his face, decided that he wouldn't let it slide. He promised that if they laid a hand on, officially as the instructor in charge of transforming them from subhumans into psychic warriors capable of fighting dragons, his companions, they wouldn't get away with it. The group then searched for a new, safe shelter to leave Jose before planning an ambush against that faction. That night, as expected, the enemies invaded the cave that the group had previously used as their shelter. Lean asked Kuro if he was ready because, together, they could defeat them all. Kuro, remembering that Lean was the only one who believed in him, closed his eyes and began moving stones with his psychic energy. He attacked the guards at the entrance, easily knocking them down. The other members of the faction, frightened, ran out to confront the enemy, but, however, they were surprised by a shower of stones, while Lean, armed with a spear, attacked with precision from afar. The leader of the faction watched everything perplexed. He was wondering how Lean had managed to defeat his companions when he realized he wasn't alone, and asked who else was there. There, Lean asked Kuro to come out from behind the bushes and announced that he would personally take care of the leader. The leader, irritated, tied his shirt around his waist, grabbed a bat, and jumped into the fight. Despite the leader's strength, Lean defended himself skillfully. After a few blows were exchanged, the leader managed to hit Lean, but was surprised by an attack to the stomach that ended the confrontation. He asked, while patting him on the back, if it hurt a lot, but then said it was a shame because that was only the beginning. He turned and told Lean not to show off like that before of humanity. Lean was a boy who stood out for his strength and intelligence. He was subjected to a genetic process to acquire more skills in a place. Training would begin immediately. The first exercise was to run around the training field until further notice. Ion warned that, giving him another blow to the face and another to the ribs. Then, Lean's spear was thrown into the air, and he fell to the ground. Lean thought that this couldn't be happening. It was happening. He wondered how his opponent could be so strong even while on the ground. Lean looked up and wondered why they had gone so far with Joseph, who was already wounded. Below, the frustrated opponent shouted, "Stop looking at me like that. Don't look at me like I'm inferior." Meanwhile, he remembered when he was considered a genius and a renowned author in Germany. His father had used his fame to create political connections and gain many favors. However, the old man's greed seemed to have no limits, and he ended up sending his son to Ark to become a psychic. Determined, the opponent stood up again and declared that he had not come this far to lose like a miserable wretch. He threw dirt in Lean's face, and he threw a barrage of punches at him. At that same moment, he grabbed him by the shirt, but Kuro ran to help. The adversary looked at him with anger and warned, Don't even try to get close." He hit Lean with a series of punches to the stomach, and Lean fell to the ground. Then, the attacker took Lean's spear and declared that he would never let someone like him walk all over him. At that moment, a stone hit his head. Kuro was using his psychic abilities to defend him, yelling at him to leave Lean alone. However, the adversary quickly approached Kuro, grabbed him by the neck, and insulted him, calling him, "Those who surrendered would be expelled." Lean ran with ease, while many were already vomiting or fainting from the effort, when the curly-haired boy, useless and saying he was a piece of garbage that should be thrown away. But what he didn't realize was the figure approaching from behind. Lean, furious, he landed a precise blow to the enemy's face. Lean, irritated, questioned if he even considered himself useful. He claimed that the adversary he hid behind numbers, while others like Simon, Dimitri, Jose, and even Kuro were better than him. Lean challenged him. "So, what are you going to do?" Lean then lunged at him with his spear, plunging it into the ground next to the opponent's head. He stated that everyone has a reason to improve, and that if the enemy wanted to survive, he needed to find his own reason. But he warned him, "If you ever touch my friends again, I won't miss with the spear tip next time." The opponent closed his eyes and, laughing to himself, said, "Dad didn't even want to be a psychic." After that, it was discovered that he had left Ark and returned to home of his own accord. In the following days, the group reunited with Jose, caught more fish, and took advantage of the 3 remaining days of training, without any further issues. When the helicopters arrived to pick them up, everyone was happy to finally return home. The other students expressed their gratitude, saying that without Lean, they wouldn't have been able to survive. Jose emphasized that Lean was the one who deserved the thanks, because without him, none of that would have been possible. At that moment, a message on everyone's bracelet announced that the survival training had ended, and the system, Curly, was about to give up. Lean helped him by carrying him as he continued the race. At the end of the day, only 40 of the 73 recruits remained. Yon congratulated them for their good work. The voice informed them that they should wait to board the helicopters when their names were called. The scene then showed Sergeant Red, explaining that the training had been monitored by the instructors, announced that, by unanimous vote, 4 candidates had been chosen. In a serious tone, he affirmed that this was not just a simple survival training exercise, but a test to identify diamonds in the rough who would become the guardians of the earth in the future. The chosen ones were Kuro, Simon, Dimitri, and Lean, who would advance to the second level. Meanwhile, Jose invited Lean to play soccer. Lean, not knowing what that was, said he could give it a try. Jose explained that holidays in Ark were rare, but that the boys were taking advantage of a full field, since all the instructors were occupied in a meeting regarding the evaluation for advancement to the second level. At the meeting, Brigadier General Alexander commented on the 4 chosen candidates. Commander Asa inquired about the candidates' qualifications. The general stated that Simon and Dimitri didn't need anything to advance, but the other 2 still needed further discussion. He pointed out that Lean, from the start, had lower psychic powers, and if it weren't for Sergeant Red's special treatment, he would still be in the rookie class. Even so, he was one of those chosen to advance. The general questioned why a boy like Lean should continue. Another instructor responded that Lean had demonstrated exceptional weapon proficiency. He warned them that the real training would begin the next day. They were about to face a true hell. At 5 a.m. the next day, patience and determination, all qualities of a perfect soldier. Furthermore, despite his limited psychic potential, he had refined his telekinetic abilities, to the point of creating unique strategies, like using centrifugal force to amplify his strikes, all without anyone having to teach him. However, Commander Asa disagreed. When discussing Kuro, she believed his sensitive psychological profile could be dangerous during the transformation. Physicality, which demands mental stability. If we send this boy there, he'll likely die, she warned. Sergeant Red argued that Kuro's psychic ascension was the greatest of all, on another level entirely, and that he also possessed short-term foresight, which was extremely important for strategies. However, another instructor pointed out that Kuro's mentality was the problem. Red explained that this was precisely why Lean had to advance with him, because Kuro's mentality was heavily influenced by Lean, who was currently acting as an older brother to him, meaning everything revolved around Lean once again. The bearded general wryly inquired whether everyone was so eager to promote Lean. At that moment, the scene shifted to the group playing soccer, with Jose passing the ball to Lean, who kicked it directly into the goal. Then, Sergeant Red appeared, and seeing that everyone was gathered together, announced the result. All 4 candidates were qualified to advance to the second level. Jose, excited, congratulated Lean, and jokingly asked why he looked so serious. Lean thanked Sergeant. Next, the routine began with another exhausting race. Training at Ark was just beginning. The recruits went to breakfast at 9 a.m. Red, stating that he would never have made it this far without him. However, the sergeant simply responded dryly, "Survive now, and you will go through A." A different kind of training was about to begin. They explained that they would use something similar to the super soldier formula to make them stronger and teach them how to use weapons to confront dragons. The process began, and everyone was placed in capsules, as if they were being drowned. The doctor responsible for the procedure, he reflected that they would have to endure, because the real challenge was only just beginning. After a week had passed, no problems had arisen. However, the next stage would be much more complicated. The doctor wondered if it was truly necessary for humans to go this far, just to guarantee their own survival. An assistant advised her to get some rest. When she left the room, she encountered Sergeant Red, who, despite claiming, since he claimed to have no interest in children, it was strange that he visited room 2 every day. He warned her not to make any mistakes, which irritated her, especially since everything had been under control up until that point. That day marked the beginning of the second phase of the procedure. They began injecting a fluid that contained a dragon psychic core, a highly concentrated liquid containing diluted components of those creatures. The goal was to force the participants to resonate with the core, which would allow them to use their psychic abilities more naturally. Suddenly, the doctor's watch alarm went off, indicating a problem. He rushed back to, and then morning classes began. The professor explained that psychic energy should be understood as something internal, created from the mind. The room, where he discovered that Lean had awakened in the middle of the process. He was visibly distressed, and the doctor tried to shut down the machine without. However, Sergeant Red stopped her, insisting that Lean had to advance to the next stage. Despite the danger, the process continued onward. After some time, the doctor checked on Lean's condition. To her surprise, he was perfectly fine. She commented that something so extraordinary had never happened before, as this was the first time that a psychic had demonstrated resistance to such intense abilities. In the end, Lean not only survived, but he also developed physically. When he was finally released, Lean told the doctor that he was fine, and that, at the very least, he no longer had to worry about being expelled from the academy. The doctor was impressed with his mentality, finding it incredible. Outside, Lean reunited with Kuro, who had also changed significantly, as well as Simon, who, he remained antisocial, much to the amusement of his classmates, who chalked it up to puberty. From there, the training advanced to the second phase. The headquarters for the second phase didn't look different from the first, but the training there was conducted in squads. Each squad had between 4 and 10 members, and there were 12 squads in all. Lean and Kuro were assigned to the 7th squad. The squad leader, Catus, introduced himself to the group and explained that the training included firearms practice, aerial combat, and squad battles. He asked if, or from the heart, Lean concentrated and tried to learn as much as possible in order to awaken his abilities. Around 12:30 p.m., it was lunchtime. They understood the importance of firearms. Lean responded that firearms were still effective against the dragon's minions, which included creatures of low intelligence, like brute ogres and silicanthropes. In addition, there were highly intelligent creatures called Hello, who served as mid-level commanders in the armies of the monsters. Although the Go could use psychic abilities, they didn't have unlimited energy like dragons. As soon as their energy was exhausted, they became vulnerable to physical weapons. The leader emphasized that, for this reason, firearms training was indispensable. Another important part of the training was squad battles, which included competitions in artificial forests and small-scale arenas. The main event was Capture the Flag, a game that required elaborate strategies to steal the flag from the enemy's base. Furthermore, the training, it heavily emphasized each person's individual skill, even though it was quite a dangerous process, mainly because of the use of metal weapons that they could inflict various injuries, even when they weren't equipped with blades. On the other hand, aerial training is conducted using small RBs, flying skateboards that the soldiers jump onto and begin to fly. The gameplay style is simple. You just need to make your opponent fall. To achieve this, a back support is always needed to manipulate the RBs, moving them from one side to the other. In rare instances, the support can also use. Lean sat next to Kuro, inviting him to have lunch with him. Kuro was the boy he had helped previously, and also his first friend at the academy during the RBs to attack opponents. For example, if the guy is distracted, you can launch an RB directly at his head to knock him down. The leader of the squad continues, explaining that before Kuro arrived, they didn't have a psychic skilled enough to provide support for the thief. But now, with Kuro joining, they wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. This made Alan a bit wary, because you know how Kuro is, timid. Meanwhile, the other squad members wondered if Kuro could really handle it. Their doubt was clear, but Lean stepped in, saying that of course Kuro was capable, he just doesn't handle pressure well. Just then, one of the squad members, a blonde guy, came over and asked why Lean was talking about Kuro, since he shouldn't be voicing his opinion. If the squad needed him to perform that function, he simply had to. Doing so, Lean then intervened, saying that even though Kuro was shy, he would do well, even if he wasn't the type to handle pressure well. Irritated, the blonde approached Lean and stared him down, telling him to shut up because he was just a rookie. The squad leader stopped the blonde and stated that Lean was right, since it was the first day. He asked them to be more patient with the newbies, since they still had a lot to learn. The leader then addressed Lean directly, with a certain arrogance, saying that even though they were on the second level, everyone there was superior and far more experienced, so he demanded respect. While they were eating, a boy passed by with a frown, staring intently at Lean. Kuro commented that this was Simon, a recruit who, according to rumors, had received a. The blonde added that Lean was only there because Kuro was with him, meaning they were both being trained as an extra package deal. The leader then stated that he did not expect. Lean was ridiculed a lot, since he was the psychic with the lowest ranked potential up until that point. When he was done, everyone in the squad started laughing at Lean. Even the leader himself was smiling cynically. But you know how Lean is, right? He doesn't get intimidated by anything. He raised his head and confidently said, "Sure, it's okay, because our brave man will give his best for the team's victory." The leader, surprised by Lean's confidence, squeezed his hand, still in disbelief that he was still so confident, even after being humiliated. In his mind, he wondered, how long will this idiot last? 2 days later, Lean was in his bedroom, taking a shower. At that very moment, Kuro was practicing, not just standing still, but also walking and shooting at targets. Lean was thinking that he was doing very well, and Kuro would no longer have anything to complain about. But at that moment, the leader, Catus, looked at him and asked, "What are you doing?" There, Kuro was in the middle of training, dodging bullets, while the leader just complained, saying that he had no patience for him. Lean thoughtfully wondered why Kuro wasn't yet good enough to be recognized. Everyone knew that with his abilities, Kuro could cause many issues. The leader approached Lean and announced that he would be on reserve, since, in the squad battle, the squad would have to adjust its special education for gifted students in the UK. Therefore, Simon had already impressively mastered psychic abilities. Lean, frustrated, members according to their abilities. Since Lean had close combat skills, he wouldn't be able to participate in the battle. Still, the leader told him not to. He must have felt sad because he couldn't watch the battle. Lean then moved on, looked at a photo Kuro had taken of him with his little brothers, and pondered. "This is not a problem. I'm sure I'll make it." Later, in the auditorium, it was announced that the next IAD would be a capture the flag competition between Squadrons 3 and New. The leader of Squad 7 explained that, because there were new members in Squad 3, they would observe closely to come up with strategies. At that moment, Lean realized that Del Simon would probably be the new member, and sure enough, he was there in the middle of the capture the flag game. This surprised everyone, as Del Simon was considered the psychic genius of the current generation. Because of this, the strategy of Squad 3 engaged in a direct confrontation with the enemy. However, Del Simon's team appeared to lose their composure when launching a direct offensive. Despite this, the members of Del Simon's squad believed victory was assured because of his psychic genius, but the blue team decided not to. He wanted to retreat and move towards them. At that moment, the blue squad members' weapons vanished from their hands as Del Simon raised his hand upwards, and as he lowered it, the weapons fell upon them. The other members of Del Simon's squad went on the offensive, landing, where only 1 in 10 survives, but he overcame the process and survived. He continued training 10 times harder each day with a single goal. Admitted that it irritated him, but he knew that there was nothing he could do about it. He only hoped that, within the 3 weeks of training, he could awaken his sword blows on the members of the blue team, and in this way, the blue team was annihilated. Finally, they managed to capture the flag outside the squad leader's room, commented that it was great to have a psychic on the squad for battle, then considered a strategy to utilize Kuro. But just then, Lean approached him with a new idea. Because Squadron 9E wasn't using any specific strategies or trying to exploit the terrain, they were simply launching individual offensives, depending solely on their combat prowess. It was then that the leader, looking serious, asked, "What are you planning? Just say it." Lean then understood why the squad leader disliked our boy so much. It's because he's always the one at the forefront, meaning that even if he doesn't intend to, he always ends up becoming the leader. The guy was afraid of losing his position on the team. Just then, the blonde teammate invited Lean to take a walk to another room. As they walked, the blonde-haired man said he had to admit that Lean is, without a doubt, exceptional. He and the leader both know it. But he doesn't fit into their squad. Lean asked why he wouldn't fit in. The blonde explained that Lean isn't afraid to contradict the leader. During training, their squad was practically a dictatorship where the leader has complete control over everything. The blonde also said that even though some of Lean's decisions were better, there should only be one leader in the squad. If any doubt arose regarding Cato, the entire squad would end up. Simon's telekinetic abilities leave viewers wondering, is he hiding something? Share your thoughts in the comments. Dividing themselves in the process, and as long as Cato was the leader, Lean wouldn't be able to participate in battles. That's why he advised Lean to apply for transfer to another squad as soon as possible. Ultimately, he believed it was essential for a squad leader to have the complete trust of all their members, and Lean's arrival in the squad was threatening Cato's authority. With this in mind, he started considering the request for a transfer, but then he had a new idea. In the office, Lean was submitting the paperwork when Wei asked if he was serious, wanting to know if Lean really wanted to go through with it. Lean explained that all the second-level instructors had to discuss it first, so it would take some time. Back in his room, Lean thought that now, Since he no longer had to worry about squad battles, he could focus more on training his body while he waited for the decision. He could also analyze all the squads and their strategies to create his own squad later. Guys, we're evolving, he thought to himself at that moment. Kuro entered the room and asked what Lean had discussed with the vice squad leader. Lean replied that it was nothing important and then inquired about preparations for the next day's air battle. Kuro said that so far, he could only maneuver 4 Arby's at a time. Lean was excited because Kuro was incredible with his psychic abilities and was progressing very quickly. Lean told him that he would be cheering him on during the battle. Meanwhile, in the training room, while Lean struggled to master telekinesis, he found out that Kuro could already use it. This surprised him and fueled his determination. Staff was arguing, wondering if someone as skilled as Kuro was actually in the squad. They confirmed it was Kuro, and everyone was eager to witness his abilities. Lean watched from the outside as the leader told Kuro to prepare himself well because it's now or never. Don't forget to leave a like so I can continue bringing you the next part of this work. What did you think of this story? Personally, I loved it. Sending a hug. See you in the next work, guys. After lunch, the recruits attended practical classes in the afternoon, followed by combat training, a night run, dinner, bathing, and dormitory maintenance. Finally, lights out was ordered at 10 p.m. Although everyone else turned off their lights, Lean couldn't fall asleep. He now had access to a much better life than before, with food, a bath, and a blanket. But the weight of responsibility for his brothers still kept him awake. 2 weeks. Many recruits had already progressed to moving small objects with kinesis, but Lean hadn't made any progress. He was beginning to question what he was doing at the academy. None of his attempts were successful, and he felt lost. He remembered asking Kuro about methods for learning telekinesis, but Kuro didn't know any tricks. Only one person remained who he could ask for help: Simon. Lean swallowed his pride and approached Simon. Simon, upon seeing Lean, smiled sarcastically, asking what brought him there. Lean, determined, asked him to teach him a method for learning telekinesis. Simon, with his typical, to become the greatest dragon hunter in the world. The story begins with a man thinking that today was the day the new recruits would be arriving. Arrogant expression, responded with disdain, suggesting Lean's country had made him ill-mannered, but Lean knelt and implored, "Please teach me a method for using telekinesis." Simon closed his eyes and asked for a pencil, stating that he would teach Lean his method, but warned him not to complain. Then, without warning, Simon stepped forward and plunged the pencil into Lean's chest. Lean remained still, confused and not understanding anything that was happening. Meanwhile, a helicopter hovered in the sky, and an instructor watched, thinking that today was the registration day. Suddenly, a bald man appeared, calling for Sergeant Red. As soon as he entered the room, he began to complain. "There's no smoking here," but Red, impatient, replied, "You came in here, so get out." The bald man sat down, saying they could go together, and asked him what he thought of the new recruits. Red responded with disdain. "Here." The curious bald man asked the boy's name. Since he was taking so long, he joked that he heard the children calling him by a nickname, something like "son of." As always, everyone is an idiot. At best, maybe 2 of them might be useful on the battlefield, despite their crude personalities. Red conceded that. Simon wasn't as bad as he seemed. He pointed out that Simon was at a higher level than the first years, and that he might even be the genius of that facility, being a psychic trained by the royalty of England. When the topic shifted to another recruit, Red commented, "He has a sense of loyalty and mental fortitude," to the Ark base. Naturally, our protagonist was one of those recruits. At that moment, a flashback shows Lean, a 10-year-old boy, introducing himself, mental abilities greater than anyone else. But Ark needs superhumans, not ordinary people. If he isn't capable of using a psychic ability, there's no place for him. Bitch. Then the most anticipated moment arrived. Everyone was gathered, and the instructor began his speech. "Today, you will be sent to the first year, but this is restricted only to those who are ready to become psychics. The basic skill needed is external manifestation, which can be identified by the light in their eyes. Even if they cannot use it," the instructor pointed out, "those who are capable of performing the manifestation externally form a line in front of the technician. Those who cannot, head to the agents in the helicopters. They are ready to take you back home." Lean looked to the side and saw the old man from before. Something different caught his attention. It seemed that the man had dyed his hair, because before it was completely dyed. White recognized that it was Major Kang, and he remained motionless, observing the scene as the children divided themselves into rows, some happy to stay, and others crying because they had to leave. He remained unmoved. After receiving that blow, Lean remembered the pencil method. He was on the floor wondering if this was the solution or if Del Simon was simply toying with him. Del Simon explained that he hadn't stuck the pencil in too deep, but that it would be easier for him to concentrate and feel the energy, since the wound would now act as a psychic channel. Simon suggested he. What was striking was that, despite his young age, he was the leader of a gang of war orphans, an old man, who appeared to be in charge of, think of it as extracting psychic energy through his wound. After he left, Lean realized he knew where his core was. From that day on, he felt that something was beginning to awaken within him, but he kept wondering what he should do to unleash that energy. Just then, the instructor shouted, pointing out that only Lean was left to decide which side he would take. Lean stood there in the middle, thinking, I have to succeed. I can't go home empty-handed, because of my brothers. My brothers. The instructor, already irritated, shouted even louder when he saw that Lean still hadn't moved. His eyes shone with frustration as he finally approached him and said, A soldier must always obey the orders of their superiors. Lean drew his hand back, hesitating. He was contemplating what he should do when he noticed a feather in the sleeve pocket of his shirt. Before he could react, the instructor punched him squarely in the face. However, before the punch landed, Lean managed to slip his hand inside his shirt and grab the pen. The reason was that if the channel wasn't big enough, he would make it wider, and with that, Lean plunged the pen into his chest. The furious man grabbed him by the shirt, asking what the hell he was doing. Lean, crying, demonstrated that his eyes had they had awakened. He was using his psychic power. The instructor threw him to the ground, sneering, I've never seen anyone as useless as you, but at least, congratulations, you passed the test. After that, Lean thought to himself, I'm finally standing on the starting line. At that moment, his friend Kuro arrived, recruiting young fighters, told him not to worry, assuring him that they weren't sending him to a prison, and asked if he had ever heard, asking if he was okay. The bald man threw something toward Lean and said, This is a symbol of success. This watch represents one of the most recent technological achievements of Ark is a bracelet-shaped device. The moment Lean put it on, a system screen popped up, verifying the user. The message read, Trainee Soldier Lean, verified. Lean, impressed, exclaimed, This is incredible. Meanwhile, the bald man proudly commented, This is the best work of my life. Shortly after, Sergeant Red began shouting, Group assignments will be completed soon. Everyone must join their group, according to the list. He explained that AR levels were divided into classes, from A to D, based on the ability demonstrated during the 3 weeks of training. Red also highlighted that it was possible to be promoted to a higher class if they were skilled enough. After announcing the names, he congratulated the 25 guys remained, and he said, I know you all thought I was a son of a bitch until now, but you're wrong. I'm not just a son of a bitch, I'm a real son of a bitch. Red continued with the breakdown. Class A, 1 person. Class B, 4 people, including our friend Lean. Class C, 5 people. Class D, 15 people. Lean thought that he wouldn't mind the classification because he was sure he would rise to Class A. Red announced that everyone would meet Instructor Yon. When the giant man appeared, the boys were shocked. He was even more terrifying than Sergeant Red himself. However, Yon was kind, and talk about a place called Ark. Lean, as astute as ever, asked if Ark was the psychic development facility. The old man, impressed by the AM, introduced himself as the instructor of weapon arts, saying, This will be a difficult year, but I hope I can count on your cooperation. The difference in payment. DeWeen surprised everyone. Lean commented, Aro, don't worry, I'll be at the top soon too. Ween summoned the group to the academy, where he demonstrated techniques with his staff and explained, You're probably wondering why we're learning about blades and spears to fight dragons. The reason lies in the psychic equipment that we will be using. There isn't a substance on Earth capable of manipulating psychic energy, but dragon skin and bones can. Weapons made from these materials inflict enormous damage on them. Lean asked, How did they hunt dragons before they had weapons like these? Ween explained, Initially, it was only hand-to-hand combat. A single dragon could kill hundreds of seekers. Although some seekers would attack from a distance, the final blow to kill a dragon had to be delivered with a short-range weapon. This weapon was used to strike the vital point and release psychic energy inside the dragon. Seeker soldiers who took on this role were called attackers. The explanation fascinated everyone with the task. Wyzen announced that it was time for everyone to find the right weapon for themselves. Lean chose a staff similar to the one Ween used, but in a miniature version. Then he asked Ween if he liked it. Lean answered yes, because the wind he felt when wielding that weapon was incredible. Ween thought to himself, the judgment and the